Thakur Vidya Mandir High School and Junior College welcomes all the level standard computer science students. Today, we are going to learn Unit 1 from Computer Science Part 2. The first lesson is Electronic Components. We are going to learn the introduction of electronic components in this part. Now, what are electronic components? See, here I have shown you a few diagrams where there are many electronic components. You can see some are big, some are small, and some are even more smaller. And they are inbuilt in a board, right? You're much more familiar with the board. It is nothing. We call it as the breadboard, green board, or else the motherboard. So, what are these electronic devices? So, we know today's electronic devices are made up of a wide variety of components. Some components are much more familiar to you, just like my resistors, but some more components are unknown to you. You are going to learn that. The components, with these components, we manufacture our simple device, that is a simple circuit which is used in a CCFL lamp, to the complicated circuit that is our motherboard. So from the simple to the complicated, we manufacture all the electronic devices using these electronic components. So depending upon the application, depending upon its features it uses, they are classified, and each and every component has its own important feature, and it has available from a small value to the higher value. So we are going to learn about these electronic components in detail in this lesson. So electronic components. Electronic components that is available in the market is classified into two important groups. One is called as the passive component, second is called as the active component. So before going ahead and learning the active and passive components and its classification, let us understand two important processes. One is called as amplification, second is called as rectification. Starting with amplification. Firstly, amplification is nothing. It is a process in which the weak signal is converted into a strong signal. So when a weak signal is converted into a strong signal, that is called as amplification. The signal that we are going to use, it can be either an AC signal or else it can be even a DC signal. So what is amplification? The process of converting a weak signal into a strong signal is called as amplification. Secondly, rectification. Rectification is nothing. It is the process of converting an AC into DC, that is an alternating current into a direct current, is called as rectification. Now, why is the need of rectification? Why we need to convert AC into DC? The first important thing is all the electronic gadgets that is available in the market and even in our home, whatever appliances that we are using, all will be requiring DC for the operation. But we are having an AC current, right? 230 volt with 50 hertz frequency. So we are going to convert the AC into DC, and then the components are going to, that is the appliances are going to work with that DC current. So that is called as rectification. So the two important processes are amplification and rectification. Now let's understand the definition of passive component. The components that do not perform active functions are called as passive components. So which are the two active functions? It is nothing but amplification and rectification. That is, these components do not perform active functions like rectification and amplification. However, these components are used along with active components because of their electrical characteristics. These components are necessary to form a complete circuit with voltage and current. Next comes the active component. So we know passive components do not perform. That means active component will be performed. These components perform active function like amplification and rectification. Already I have defined amplification and rectification. Switching is also done using active components. Now what is switching? It is nothing to turn on and off. That is called a switching process. Both active and passive components together form an electronic circuit. Now, when I'm saying the active function like amplification and rectification, what you people might be thinking, amplification, rectification, active components are doing. So, active components are more important than passive components. But for the active components to perform amplification and rectification, it requires the help of passive components. Again, I'm saying for this active components to perform amplification and rectification, it requires passive components. So, active and passive components together form an electronic circuit. They are used in a wide variety of voltage and current sources. Whatever devices that we see in our laboratory, that we come across our day-to-day life, from a simple to a complicated circuit, all the circuit are manufactured using active and passive components. So this is the definition of active and passive components. Now let us study the tree diagram of electronic components. Electronic components. So I have already defined what is an electronic component. It is classified into two parts. First comes the passive components, which doesn't perform amplification and rectification. Passive components help the active components to perform amplification and rectification. Secondly, we have the active components which perform amplification and rectification. Passive components are further classified into three parts. Firstly, the resistors. Already you have learned the concept of resistors in your lower class. The resistors are further classified as fixed and variable. Now, what is fixed? That means the value of the resistor will be fixed. It will be having a single value. Variable means the value will be ranging. For example, if it is a 10 ohm resistor, the value will range from 1 to 10 ohm. Secondly comes the capacitors. Capacitors are further classified as fixed and variable. Lastly comes the inductors, which are further classified into three parts: air core, iron core, and ferrite core. So this all members belong to the passive components. So passive components which do not perform amplification and rectification is classified into three parts: resistors, capacitors, and inductors, which are further divided. Resistors and capacitors are divided as fixed and variable. Inductors are further classified as air core, iron core, and ferrite core. Next comes the active components. Active components are classified into two parts. First comes the electron tubes. Now, what are electron tubes? Electron tubes, the name itself signifies the component will be just looking like a tube. Before the invention of advanced technology, electron tubes were used in the manufacturing of our electronic devices. Computers were also manufactured using electron tubes. When we go to the generation of electronic components, or we can say the hierarchy of computers, electron tubes comes under the first generation. Electron tubes are further classified into vacuum tubes and gas filled tubes. Vacuum tubes, you know what is that? Gas filled tubes also will be further divided depending upon the gas that you are filling. It will be neon, xenon, and so on. Example. This semiconductors is the second important classification of active component. This semiconductor has been now replaced, that is the electron tubes is now replaced by this semiconductors. Semiconductors plays a very important role. All the electronic components and the gadgets, from simple to the your mobile phone and laptop and computers and so on, all the devices, the electronic circuits are constructed using semiconductors. Semiconductors are further classified into diodes. This device will perform rectification, and transistors. This device will perform amplification. So diode is going to perform rectification, and transistor is going to perform amplification. So this is the tree diagram of electronic components. So we know electronic components are divided into two parts, passive and active, and we have learned the passive components classification and again its types. Here also active components classification and its types. Now in this entire tree diagram, we are not going to discuss in detail about the electron tubes because since it has been replaced by semiconductors, in this lesson we are going to detailedly learn about the concept semiconductors, that is diodes and transistor. And one more thing students, here again the fixed and the variable capacitors and resistors are further will be classified depending upon the type of material it is being used to manufacture. So this all your passive components where we have inductors, capacitors, we have resistors, inductors, and so on. This all belongs to your active components where we have the diode, transistor, ICs, because ICs are manufactured using our active components. This is the electron tubes. You can see it's just the structure is similar like a tube. This is the electron tube. Here comes the vacuum tubes. This is the vacuum tube. See the size how it is looking like. And this is your gas filled tubes. So electron tubes, which are further classified as vacuum tubes and gas filled tubes. In gas filled tubes you can see different colors, right? The different colors will be depending upon the type of gas that you are going to use. It differs from element to element. It can be neon, xenon as I said, and so on. By this, we complete the concept of electronic components introduction. So, it is a 3-mark question. If it has been asked, explain the tree diagram of electronic components. Firstly, you are going to speak about the definition of passive component. Secondly, the definition of active component. And you are going to draw the tree diagram of the electronic components. The tree diagram, we have passive, active. You see, I'll show you the diagram again. Passive and active component which are further classified as resistors, capacitors and inductors. Fixed variable, resistor and capacitor. Air core, iron core and ferrite core inductors. Electron tubes are further classified as vacuum tubes and gas filled tubes. Semiconductors are further classified as diodes and transistor. The main two function of my electronic component is amplification and rectification. Amplification is the process of converting a weak signal into a strong signal, and rectification means the process of converting an AC current into a DC current. That is called as the rectification. So by this we complete the introduction part of electronic components. Thank you.